So this is the caliper and the brake, which I rebuilt off camera for the right hand side. And this is how it started. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to film and show you guys how I turned this into this. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to remove this assembly so that it can swing upwards. This is one of the ways that you can check the brakes, change the brake pads and check the wear on the disc brake. What you'll do is you'll see that there's a bolt behind here. I've already unscrewed it, and that allows the caliper to move freely upwards. Move freely is a bit of an overstatement because I think you'll find that a rubber mallet may come in handy in order for it to be able to swing up. There we go. And that's the rear brake pad, which is already it's not too bad really. Now when you're cleaning these brakes, it's very important to use brake cleaner because there's asbestos in this. So if you go scrubbing around on that and you're not using brake cleaner, which is designed to help the asbestos sink down and not go into the air, you're going to be having a bad day. So we'll be replacing these brake pads. I got some new ones. Pull up the caliper like that, and we can take out the front brake pad, which is similarly not too bad where it is still in spec. At least it was on the right hand side. I'm imagining if they've been changed over at the same time, these would be a similar wear. It's not too bad, but I'm replacing them anyway. I'm rebuilding, may as well replace from scratch. Now the next thing that we want to be doing is we're going to be removing the brake line. We are going to have to bleed the brakes in order to do so. But we're going to be taking this off. We're also going to be taking off, if you can see back here, this is the e-brake, the emergency brake. So we're going to be removing that as well. And we are going to loosen up this brake line. Alright, now just be aware that there is a little copper washer right here, and it's important that goes underneath the bolt there, and we don't want to lose it. So for now I'm going to leave it on the nut for the brake. What we're going to need to do is first we're going to have to detach the emergency brake. You'll see that there's this tiny little tab just here. What you're going to do is you're going to pry that out, remove the you can see that mine is damaged. I'll show you what the bracket should look like because it's complete on the right hand side. You should be able to push the whole e-brake assembly through that bracket hole like so. And there, you'll see it's free. And now we can pull this through and remove the entire caliper assembly, like so. And there you go. That is the caliper removed. This is the brake housing bracket, which we are also going to remove. And in order to do that, you'll see, well, I don't know if I'll be able to show you, but there are two big bolts directly behind, and you're going to pull those ones out. And that is the caliper housing. This is the caliper, and we're going to be completely pulling these apart and refurbing them. So I'm referring to the Haynes manual here for the disassembly of the brake pad, the brake caliper I should say. And the first thing that it calls for is the removal of a cylinder boot here. And it is held into place by, caked in there will be a little metal ring. Luckily for us, we've got a replacement for this ring and for this boot, so I don't have to be too particular, careful about how we're going to pull this apart. And what has worked for me is just a pair of pliers and also a pair of tweezers. So we're going to see how we go getting in here. So we've just got to get her off the housing. Excellent. There's purchase. And I'm not too concerned, as I mentioned, about whether or not I pierce the boot or warp this ring, because we've got a replacement kit coming to rebuild this caliper. Alright, so now that the ring has been removed, we can now remove the boot. To do that, and grab our trusty pair of tweezers and just pull the edge up like so. There we go, look at that. And then, you see that? So I don't know if I was the one that caused that damage, but you'll see that there's a good tear now in that boot. That was probably me. Actually no, look, we'll see that there's also another tear here. So this is worn and would need to have been replaced anyway. That being the gaping hole. Pretty sure it's not supposed to look like that. Alright, so we're going to just chuck this one out straight away. Now, the next part that the book calls for is the removal of a piston using compressed air through the brake fluid just here. You fill that up. Make sure you've got a block of wood. Because when you direct compressed air into it, the piston's just going to spring out. And just as a warning, make sure you've got a lot of rags, because this whole compartment here is full of brake fluid at the moment. And so once this piston is unseated, that brake fluid is just going to go absolutely everywhere. So we're not going to do that right now though, because I don't have my compressor on and it's pretty late at night. So instead what we're going to be doing is we'll be removing some of the little gasket parts. Some of the easier things. So here I want to be particularly careful. So this part here is just the pivot point. This screw goes in like so, and that allows the caliper to rotate. We're going to be re-greasing all of these parts and cleaning this up, but you can see it's already in really good nick. There's no damage at all to that surface. It just needs a good clean. So we'll put that back in its housing. Now this boot I'm going to be very careful with, because I don't want to have to, hopefully, if it's good nick, we can reuse. So I'm just going to use my fingers to unseat it and gently push it out like so. Here she comes. There we go. So, yep, that boot is in really good nick, just dirty and in need of some new grease. So I'm going to put that aside so that we remember where she goes for next time. Now, unfortunately, I haven't been able to find a replacement for this part, and the manual specifies that once you warp this plate, you have to replace. I don't think it's that easy when you're working with a car that is discontinued. Parts like that do not always come readily and are not always available. So I've got myself a blunt chisel bit here, and essentially all I'm going to do is I'm going to hammer this out, which will allow this part here to come out, and we can then clean this part as necessary. Onto the other side there. You should be able to now lever it pretty well. There we go. So a lot of built up gunk. This is the guide pin boot here, like so. And then that's the metal retaining clip, which we're going to flatten out, attempt to flatten out and reuse, because these things are very hard to find. And if you have a look at the boot itself, there's actually, apart from it being grotty as all sin, it's not too bad. There's a little bit of damage here, but that's not enough to impact the seal there on the metal lip. So you can see the inside there is okay. I guess in a bizarre way, I'm saving the best part to last, which is this the removal of the piston, because it's pretty insane. Oh gosh, look at that. You'll even see that there's a little bit of a spiderweb nest right in there. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be removing these two bolts here. They're a bitch to remove, so I'm going to put them in my massive vise. So that's one, with a little locking washer there. Alright, so the last thing that we're going to be doing is we're going to be removing this piston from the caliper. Now the book calls to force compressed air through it in order for the caliper to be released. When it does get released, there's quite a bit of force and also a lot of brake fluid in here. So I've got a rag to help sort of prevent the scarring of a piston against these metal components here. But when it does come out, it's going to come out with quite a bit of force, if anything like the first one is to go by. So what we're going to do is we're going to position that there, we're going to chuck that in here, and we're going to see how we go. Oh, there we go. Did you hear that? That's the piston out, and that is a lot of brake fluid coming out. So there we go. Not as hard as all of that. You just need to get the right angle. And it's going to be a bit of a cleanup job after as well. So let's get this workspace cleaned up. So now all I'm going to do is I'm going to try to get a little bit of this surface dirt and grime off of this caliper body itself. The intention is to put this through the sandblaster. It's quite an odd piece, like the angle of it is quite odd, which means that it's going to be a perfect sort of candidate for sandblasting. Before we do that, the last part that we want to remove off of this body itself before we mask it up is this boot here and this boot here. I'll show you how to do that. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to peel this component away off the arm that holds the emergency brake mechanism, and then you should be able to just pull it inside out, the book recommends, and then pull her off entirely. And I'm just going to be scrubbing these plastic components in the laundry sink. Okay, so the next part we want to be taking off is just wedged in here. You'll see this little metal spring. This is keeping the sort of housing, that seal there. There we go. So now that's freed. Just pull that around, off the lip there. Excellent. Okay, and now all we need to do is lift this part up and off the assemblage. There we go. And that spring looks like it's still
in good nick. Put that where I'm not going to lose it. And now we're onto this part of the body, which is kept in place with this retaining, I guess you'd call it a little piece of metal. It's just friction there. The piece of metal itself is quite tight or strong. It's supposed to sort of sit a little bit of a smaller diameter than what it's sitting on, and it's got this little groove here within the actual plastic, the rubber boot I should say, where it sits naturally, or it wants to sit naturally. So we're just going to lever up one of its sides using this piece of wood, soft wood, in case you can't tell. This is where there's going to be a lot of grease on the inside, and we will be re-greasing after we've cleaned up these parts. Alright, there we go. And that is this part free, just dirty, in need of a really, really good scrub. Alright. So now this part here, the boot itself, is free to come off. At this point I'm just trying to find purchase. There we go. Excellent, just by hand will be fine. So I'm just pulling it up. And look at all that old grease in there. Oh, it's disgusting. And what we can do is we can just pull this boot off entirely, because we want the caliper to be free to mask off and to sand. There we go. Alright, so that's that boot off. Very dirty and in need of a good wash down, and we will also degrease this. First thing we're going to do is we're going to clean up the head of this bolt. This is the bolt that goes into this housing here with a boot and helps the caliper spin and acts as a point of support as well. As you can see, the actual bolt body itself is really, really lovely. It's just the front where we've got some surface rust and built up grime. So I'm going to hit this with the wire brush. Alright, so this is the housing for the emergency brake, which goes through here. This has been through a wash and a scrub, and there's still quite a bit of embedded dirt on there. We're going to put this one through the sandblaster, and at the same time I'm going to do some of the hardware through the sandblaster as well. After this, what I'm going to do is I'll show you guys how I blue or blacken bolts using old oil as a good rust preventative. I've got my flamethrower here. We use this in the garden. It's a little bit overkill, but a flame's a flame. What we're going to do is we're going to heat these nuts up, nuts and bolts, and then once they've reached temperature, we're going to quench them in this old oil. I know that that is a plastic container. I will be careful. I am waiting on a metal one.
is quench them in the oil, like so. So what the blackening does, at least what I've seen and read on the internet, which is always a good source of truth, is that the heat opens up the pores of the metal, and which makes it receptive to the oil. And oil is a great anti-rustive property because oil and water do not mix. Alright, so these are ready to get painted. I'm going to be painting them with the caliper paint in the silver. I'm going to be doing a double layer on this with a clear coat, but we're going to leave this one here just with the caliper paint. Before we get painting though, I'm just going to do a final run over with some mineral terps to make sure that these are, one, completely dry, and two, don't have any grease on them. And we're going to spray this with caliper paint. Now this caliper paint doesn't require primer, so we're just going to go straight at it. I'm going to aim for 3 very light layers, and then I'm going to paint this part with a clear coat as well, and then cure it in the oven so that it's super durable. In the meantime, I'll show you how this one's turned out. I'm not going to touch it because the clear coat's probably a little bit still tacky. I want to keep it for maybe another half hour because it's quite cold outside, so paint's going to take a little bit longer for it to cure. But as you can see, it's come up a treat, which is great. I'm going to be putting this one in the oven to set properly, cure and harden, and then it can be right for installation on the caliper itself. Alright, so this caliper has dried and been painted. I'm going to remove the mask and see how she's looking. Alright, so that's been completely redone, repainted. I'm really happy with how this has turned out. And now, it's a little bit of blue, God knows what that's from. And now, she's going to be right to reassemble. Alright, so very excitingly, we've completed cleaning up all of the parts for reassembly of the brake caliper on the front left hand side. So we've got the bracket here, which has been painted and it's come out beautifully. I'm really happy with that. The clear coating with the high heat clear and curing in the oven, and same here with the emergency brake bracket. So what we're going to do is we're going to start to put all of this together. Now the only thing that I'm waiting on is the new boot, which will fit around the piston, as well as the new O-ring. I've got a brake kit coming though, so it shouldn't be long, and we should be good to start putting some of these basic components back together again. Alright, let's get it going. So we're going to start with this one here, and I'm just going to hand tighten it for now. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put the emergency brake bracket right back onto the caliper, and I'm going to be using some Loctite. Now I'm going to do this in the vise, so I'm going to put some rags in just so I don't nick the surface there of the caliper as I compress it. To be honest, I should probably invest in some rubber teeth for my vise. But again, it's one of those things that I always mean to do and I never get around to doing it. Alright, so first thing I'm going to be doing is applying a little bit of Loctite around the actual bolt itself.
Just a little squeeze around it. And that'll just mean that it's not going to go anywhere we don't want it to, and I want this to be as permanent as I can make it. Alright. So we're going to start with this one here. And I'm just going to hand tighten it for now. And now I'm going to apply the thread lock to the second one. And then we're going to batten it down. See, there's still a little bit of wriggle room in the support arm. So I can get that lock, the thread just right. I want it to be hand tight. So I don't want it across threads here, especially inside the caliper body, because that would be very, very hard to rectify. There we go. No, they're not. Oh. There we go. So that's the first part of the caliper assembly put together. So to rebuild this brake, I'm referring to chapter 9 of my Haynes manual. I'm going to be using 2 different types of grease, as well as some brake fluid. And the first thing that I'm going to put back in, after giving it a clean and inspecting it, and this rubber ring is looking really good, this is going to go back inside the piston wall within the caliper body. And there's a little groove on the inside there, which I'm going to put it in. But before I do that, I'm going to apply a little bit of brake fluid to the inside wall of the piston housing. Just going to go into the actual housing itself, just to lubricate the wall there where the piston will go. Alright, the next thing I'm going to be doing is applying a little bit of that brake grease. So I'm going to be applying a bead of that around where that O-ring will sit. Alright, that's one greasy person. So, then we're going to grab this O-ring and we're going to insert it into its housed slot within that cylinder wall. Making sure that I'm not accidentally kinking it. It's alright once it's in, but it's getting it in that can just be a little bit tricky. There you go. Make sure that that's nice and tight. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to be refitting the piston into the caliper itself. And this is where the Haynes manual is incorrect. It says that you can do it just pushing, using your hands, but it's you're not going to get very far with that. You're going to have to turn it. So all I'm doing is I'm applying again thin bit of the grease, brake fluid I should say, to the outer wall of this piston, and we're going to push her in. I'm going to use some pliers once we get to that point. There we go. So I'm using a pair of long nose pliers and just twisting it in, making sure that it's moving freely. I don't want to cross thread it at this stage. So this caliper piston should be seated properly now. If it is a bit proud, I will adjust it before installation, but we'll see how that's going. Alright, the next part we're going to be doing is we're going to be packing this with what they call for is RX Nig Lube, and I've read that this is a really good alternative to the Nig Lube, because of course it's a Subaru part that doesn't exist anymore. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be packing this entire section here with pretty much as much grease as we possibly can. A really valuable resource is I found the original service manual for the 1600, the 1800 engine, which is what the Brumby's running, and chapter 10 of this book, which I believe is around 440. Yeah, there we are. It'll show you exactly where you want to be putting all of the different greases. So we're going to check for front brake 10. There we go. So here you can see it's got the grease application. So here are the component parts. And here is where you should be applying what grease. So we'll have a look in here and you can see Nig Lube, which is the green one, replacement. This is going to be going all through the head of that caliper here, which is this part. So I'm going to pack that in and essentially use as much grease as I can in that respect. We're going to leave that iPad there for reference. So the idea is we're not going to be shy. There was a significant amount of grease in here when we cleaned it up, and we're going to be similarly as sort of thorough. Now you'll probably note that I have never removed this spring assemblage. The issue is that it requires a special tool that is really hard to track down, and being able to replace it all with appropriate parts and stuff, it's just more trouble really than it's worth. So I'm just going home. I'm going to use this whole thing essentially. Just leave it a little bit in case we need a little bit more. There we go. So that greasy boy is packed down nicely. We're going to be going back in reverse order to how we put it all together. The first thing that I'm going to be doing is putting this retaining spring back on past this arm, and it sits in here and it will connect up. You can even see the little texture from where that retaining spring is sat on this boot. So it's going to go back on there, here. So we'll put that one on first. There we go. Heaps easier without gloves. Try to be clean, and then that's why you don't want to be, essentially. So there you go. Particularly check underneath here that it's not kinked, because the next step is, well, so what I've done is that housing there gets pushed up into this little gap here, and then this spring will shift out and clamp it down to make it a tight fit. So what I'm going to do, because that's just spring on spring, is I'm not going to be shy. I'm going to use a little metal component to help lever it up and over. And it's sitting there snugly, which is very good. The next thing that we're going to be doing now is replacing this metal clip, which seats around the bottom here. And in my experience, getting it underneath this housing without kinking the boot is quite painful. But we're going to just persevere and give it a shot and see if I can do it on camera. Okay, there we go. So what I'm doing is I'm checking that this seal is complete along the rim there, and that this metal part, the ring, is seated correctly. So I'm pushing it in and making sure that we've got a complete fitment there. There we go. Lovely. Alright, so that boot's completely refurbished. And now we're going to replace this boot here, which just sits on the armature for the e-brake lever. And it's pretty simple. Just slide her on. Like so. And make sure that she's covering, and you'll hear that clip into place. Okay, so the next part we're going to be focusing in on is replacing this boot. And it goes in here along with this component and this bolt. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be applying a bit of the grease to the inside part there, as well as the inside of the boot itself. And that's just because it's a moving part, we just want it to be really greased up and happy to move. And it's a really good sort of indicator is if the part's supposed to move, flex and pivot, then applying grease sounds like a great idea. So that's all within the boot itself. Now I'm going to apply it within this section here. Go. And just going to use the bolt there to make sure that it's completely greased up. Excellent. And then we're also going to be applying a bit of that grease on the inner ring. Okay, so we're going to force this boot in, shift her across, there we go, beautiful. And now the guiding pin goes in, like so. Alright, the next part is we're going to be replacing this boot and putting it back in. Yes, this is the original component. I had a look online and it's just something that is not easily found. It's one of the issues with some of these service books is obviously they're designed and written at a time where these cars are still in production, and so all the parts and whatnot are readily available. So all I've done is I've put this back in a vise to push the pins back flat, relatively so. And that's pretty much all we need to do. So this part goes in here. Before I do that though, I'm going to pack this with grease because this is a part where a bolt goes. And we want to make sure that it's freely moving. So to push this metal shroud back in, I'm just going to put it in the vise and squeeze it. So not very much pressure at all, but that's been reseated. Alright, so that is the brake caliper rebuilt and redone. The only thing that I'm waiting on now as part of a rebuild kit is the boot here, which surrounds the piston, which I will put in once it arrives, and then it's secured down with this clip here that drops down into a ring on the very edge there of the piston housing. So we'll do that once the piston or the caliper repair kit arrives, and then we can leave them there. Greased in there, greased this new boot, and now I'm going to install the inner and outer rims into the little slot. Should be able to find it really easily. There we go. Okay, so that's seated. And now we're going to grab the new ring and insert it between the outer circle and that caliper wall, and you should be able to feel where it seats really well. And there we go. Just like that, new boot is installed. And that is the calipers completely redone now.